Welcome back for another story on a cozy October Friday. Tonight, we're following a young couple on a doomed hike. Pour 'em and roll 'em. This is Wolves. I brought my girlfriend on a trail hike to propose to her, but we ran into a pack of wolves. I'd been planning the proposal for 7 months. I always knew I was going to ask Dana to marry me at some point, but it took a long time to find a memorable place to ask the question. I wanted something memorable, and I guess I found it. There was a dense national park near our city that my family hiked and introduced Dana to. She was a rock climber, so she was used to longer treks through the woods to prime spots. In the park were dozens of intersecting trails and pathways that would take even the most seasoned hiker weeks to traverse all of them. Most people just stuck to the classic 4 to 5 main trails, but on a lesser known one, there was a secluded lookout at the furthest point of the trail, 7 kilometers from the parking lot, separated from it by dense forest and steep ravines. It was almost jungle-like terrain in the center. The lookout was a large rock slab protruding from the woods that oversaw the entire park from 50 feet up. In the fall, the canopies below caused the entire park to look like a beautifully random patterned quilt. Dark and light reds, yellows, oranges, greens, and browns. My parents took my brother and I there and introduced us to the view. Then they told us that was where my dad proposed to my mom. At that moment, I knew I'd be asking Dana the same question at the same place. 8 months later, I'd saved up enough for the ring and planned the proposal for a Saturday in the fall. It was supposed to be beautiful all day, but with a storm rolling in later at night, we figured we'd be long gone by then. We packed our usual snacks and drinks for the hike, and I snuck a small-sized bottle of champagne into my backpack. The ring was in its box, in a Ziploc bag, zipped up in an interior pocket in my pack. I wasn't taking any chances with it, because the other thing was, the park had become ground zero for a growing homeless encampment. The tent cities that populated our lower town had been pushed off the streets and into a public park, then into another and another. It was an impossible situation that continued to be handled the wrong way and fostered growing resentment and bursts of violence. The city needed to crack down on the drug and assault problems in the encampments, so the homeless had now moved on to filling a national park. I'd seen some homeless people out and about on the trails. You could tell who they were, obviously. They weren't dressed for a hike, but they never bothered anyone or caused trouble. They just wanted somewhere quiet to live how they could. Still, it was always something that stayed on your mind when you entered the trails, especially with the large rock on the ring in my backpack and the complete lack of cell reception in the park, which was why I now carried a Damascus steel Bowie knife, and Dana always packed bear mace. We set off on the trail at noon. I was aiming for us to hit the lookout by 2 p.m., propose, and be back to the car by 5-ish. As we went further along the trail, clouds overtook the sky and very little light made it through the canopies. The woods got darker. Even though Dana and I typically had back and forth banter through our hikes, I'd planned to spend most of the walk going over my proposal in my head, making any last-minute changes before the lookout. But instead, I found myself thinking about the awkward walk back to the car if Dana said no. I was doubting myself, trying to push the proposal to a later date at a location that was easier for her to say no in. Like she'd feel trapped up there and would feel pressured to say yes. I don't know why I was thinking that way, but all of a sudden I wanted to rethink the whole thing. All because, for some reason, I now thought Dana was going to say no. The walk up felt extra long. On top of me trying to convince myself out of proposing, there was a strange anticipation in the air. I couldn't tell if we brought it to the forest, or if it was already here. But something felt off, and smelled even worse. We didn't see any animals or critters of any kind. In fact, we didn't hear anything. Birds, insects, nothing at all. And we didn't come across a single person on the trail. No hikers or any of the homeless. It was just me and Dana. Finally, we started to climb up to the lookout, and I'd fully talked myself out of the proposal. I made plans in my head to wait and propose on New Year's Eve. Or maybe in the spring. First day of summer, for sure. Maybe I'd wait a year. We were young, why rush? Then we walked out onto the ledge, overlooking the vast park, and I saw the look on Dana's face that made me fall in love with her and always caused my knees to buckle. I remembered why I saved for 8 months at a job I hated for a ring for her. We stood at the edge of the lookout, arm in arm, and gazed at the beautiful vista. I was thinking about how to start. I'd had the idea to begin with our first date and how it had been at a house party that ended up getting trashed. Dana and I met on the front lawn and drunkenly watched as the trees were filled with toilet paper and the house went to hell from drunken teenagers. But my memory was cut short. There was rustling somewhere behind us, twigs cracking, branches bending and snapping forward, and breathing. The strangest, pained and struggling breathing, fast and heavy. Images of a group of homeless men with knives and used needles appearing from the dark woods floated my mind. They'd go for Dana. They'd get her. They'd get our stuff. They'd get the ring. And they'd kill us and bury us somewhere in the woods, or throw us over the edge of the lookout, and it would be called an accident. The bushes continued to rustle. Finally, something emerged, but much lower than my eye line. I thought it was a dog at first, a German shepherd, but it wasn't a dog, and there was more than one. There was a pack of 6 wolves staring out at us. There was something else to them, though. Something frightening and desperate and frenzied surging behind their bloodshot eyes. It was more than hunger. It felt like chaos. Demented, ravenous chaos. They were twitching and rapidly blinking. Their mouths had bloody foam spilling from them. Their legs and paws were slicked with blood and dirt and garbage. All I could think was rabies, or something similar. Dana and I backed up, though we only had another 5 feet until the lookout dropped off. I slowly pulled my blade out, and Dana reached into her bag for her bear mace. She searched for it, and searched, but it wasn't there. Dana had forgotten to pack the mace. I put my arm in front of Dana, stepping in front of her. The alpha wolf stepped forward, matching me. It had a fresh wound across its face, with blood and pus spewing from its right eye. The rest of the wild animals followed the alpha, though they all carried the same crazed look. I realized they were all going to come in really fast and hit us hard. The look in their eyes was telling me they didn't care if they tumbled over the side with us. There was just no thought or reason in them. They'd gone completely mad. As I was readying myself to start swinging and trying to toss or shove them, one at a time, over the edge, Dana yelled my name. She was pointing down one side of the lookout. There was a path of sorts that you could climb down. Dana was a seasoned rock climber. I was not, but we didn't have much of a choice, or time. She started to climb, and I got an idea. I pulled the champagne bottle out of my bag and popped the cork, spraying the bubbly all over the wolves. That bought me a few seconds before the animals reoriented themselves and came at me. I bought enough time for Dana to climb down the side of the lookout, and me to follow close by. The wolves got to the edge as I climbed down just far enough that I was out of their reach. They barked and snarled, and I felt their heated breath and bloody slobber spray down on me. But I kept climbing, following Dana's path down. I tried not to look below to see how far up we were, but I did. We were 10 feet from the canopies, which would be another 30 feet to the ground. Dirt and small rocks skittered down from above, hitting my head. I looked up and saw one of the wolves had gone over the edge. It fell like a missile just to my left, howling and narrowly missing us and disappearing into the canopy below. Then another one came over, but it was falling directly towards me, with its teeth gnashing. I yelled Dana's name, quickly instructing her to move to the right. Then I scrambled and found footing just to the side, narrowly avoiding the ravenous wolf as it shot down beside me. But Dana didn't. The wolf's upper body and legs connected with Dana's shoulder and took her with it. Dana screamed out for me as she fell, disappearing below the canopies with the wolf. I started climbing down as fast as I could. I had no idea if the path down even went anywhere, but I kept finding footing on shrubs and rocks to use for grips as I descended below the canopies and saw thick layers of branches populating the trees. I was glad the trees were dense. I was hoping Dana had caught onto one on the way down. and the wolf had fallen to its death. Then, I heard her. Dana cried out to me from the forest floor. She was alive, but she sounded like she was badly injured. I tried not to think about what state she was in. I tried not to think about the wolves falling from above, or if they'd found a way down and were going to beat me to Dana. I just thought about getting to her, and whatever state she was in, carrying her somewhere safe to wait while I got help. There wasn't a chance I could carry her 7 kilometers with the wolves out there. They'd get the scent if they hadn't already. I got closer to the ground and finally looked down. The first thing I saw were the 2 wolves. One was dead. Its head exploded against a rock cluster. The other one had its lower half twisted backwards, but it was still alive and pulling itself towards Dana. Dana was in really bad shape. She was laying on her back. Both legs looked broken, but one especially so, with bones piercing through skin. She was covered in scrapes, cuts, and bruises. There were burn marks on her underarms from rubbing against tree bark on the fall down. But she didn't appear paralyzed. Her upper body was moving, as were her legs, even though they were clearly broken. But through the pain and crying, she was very aware, and even looked almost mobile. The wolf was crawling closer to Dana. It was snarling, snapping and frothing as it used its front paws to pull itself towards her. I climbed the last 10 feet down in a hurry, not worrying if I fell, but I managed to find footing on each step until my feet hit solid ground. I ran over to Dana just as the wolf was getting to her. I didn't think about what to do. I just sprinted over to them and kicked as hard as I could. My shin connected with the wolf's lower jaw and snapped the animal's head back, completely shattering its neck and spine. I got down and held Dana, trying to calm her. I quickly made tourniquets for both legs out of my belt and an extra t-shirt. She said her breathing was tight and her ribs felt off. She hit the canopy hard and played pinball against several thick branches before landing feet first. But she was alive. Dana knew we had to move, and that it was going to hurt. She took a thick piece of wood and used it to grip down on. I picked her up. She strained and bit down, but we started moving. I still had adrenaline pumping through my veins, but we just hiked 7 kilometers before the tense climb down, and my legs were starting to burn with the extra weight I was carrying. I knew I could make it back, but there was no way I could get us both there. Then I saw it. A medium-sized brown structure. A shack. An old park ranger post. I carried Dana to the structure, but of course, it was locked. After 8 heavy kicks, I managed to break the door in. Inside, we found an old first aid kit, and Dana started trying to dress her many wounds. I knew time was precious and told her I had to make a run for the parking lot. We needed paramedics and a police escort out of the woods, and the longer I stayed there, the sooner the wolves would pick up our trail of blood and scents and find the shack. I got Dana to lean against the door after I left, hoping her weight would be enough to barricade it shut if and when the wolves arrived. Then I ran. Based on the direction of the lookout and the rocky path down, I knew exactly where I was, and sadly, it would take longer to get to a trail or path than it would to cut right through the woods. So I did. I didn't think I had the time to waste, especially with how dark it was getting. I could barely see up through the trees, but when I could, the clouds were dark. I knew I could run 10K in under an hour. This was 7K, but it was through rocks and twigs and brambles and through bushes and ravines. I kept telling myself to just keep a solid pace and watch for footing, and I'd get there in time. But I also kept my eyes open and darting around. I kept playing the worst case scenario over and over in my head, and that always involved the wolves catching up to me, tearing me apart, and Dana not getting help in time. Then I saw something ahead. Red tarp, green, blue, then tents and clotheslines. There was a homeless encampment, but it was now a cemetery. I tried to avoid looking down, but I counted 5 men and 2 women in varying states of being eaten. Stomachs and necks were opened and innards spilled out. It was horrifying. It wasn't just the people, though. Everything was shredded. The clothes, sleeping bags, boots. The small amounts of food in the camp was all over the place. It was a complete frenzy of destruction. Then I saw the bags and bags of drugs and needles all over the As I was making my way through the destroyed campsite, I tripped on something. I looked down and saw it was someone's arm, chewed off at the elbow. Clutched in the hand was a small caliber revolver. I didn't want to touch it, but something inside me told me I'd need it, so I took it. I started running again, but I let doubts float through my head, whether I'd make it in time, whether I was even going in the right direction, whether the wolves would catch up to me. I told myself if I could just make it to the parking lot, if I could just make it to cell phone reception, if I could just get an ambulance and the police, and if we could just get to Dana before she freezes or bleeds out. My thoughts were meshing together in a feverish blend. I couldn't really tell what I was doing anymore. My body was on autopilot, just ambling forward. Then I heard the howls behind me. I turned briefly to see shadows darting through the darkness of the woods. It was the wolves. They'd found my trace. My adrenaline kicked back into gear and my legs pumped up and down faster. I clutched the gun in my hand, waiting for the animals to get closer. I didn't want to waste any bullets hitting air. I heard sets of paws behind me and I turned back, firing off 3 rounds at the quickly gaining shapes. The chase behind stopped for a moment before the wolves continued after me. I had no idea how far I had left to go, but I knew I couldn't keep this up much longer. Finally, through the trees ahead, I could see red and blue lights. There were sounds of sirens, of men, movement. I ran towards it. The sounds of the wolves were gaining again. I turned back and fired the last 2 rounds at the pack, causing them to spread out. I burst out of the woods and onto the entrance of the parking lot. The joy I felt of my feet hitting cement was short-lived. A gunshot roared out and I felt my shoulder tear open. I fell to the ground. I'd been shot. I had no idea why I'd been shot, but saw several police cruisers and officers filling the parking lot. Behind me, I heard the wolves coming out from the tree line. I turned and saw the main wolf, the scar-faced alpha, leading the way. The wolves got 10 feet from me before the police finally saw the situation and opened fire on them. The wolves were all killed and I was quickly rushed into an ambulance. I told the cops to go in and get Dana in the ranger post. I wouldn't leave unless she was safe, but I didn't have a choice. I was taken to the hospital for the gunshot wound to my shoulder. It was explained to me that the police officers had been called to a disturbance at the park, and possible deaths were occurring involving a homeless encampment. What had happened was a pack of wolves had been driven south, looking for food, and came across the encampment in the park. They'd eaten the food, which had been kept with a varying assortment of drugs. The drugs sent the wolves into a feverish insanity, and they began attacking people in the park, leaving 15 dead, 12 homeless, and 5 hikers. The police didn't know about the wolves when I burst through the trees and out into the parking lot. All they knew was they'd been called out here for a disturbance involving the homeless. They'd heard gunshots, then saw me, a bloody and dirty guy with a gun, waving it around as I ran out of the forest like a madman. A nervous, green officer got trigger happy and fired the round that caught me. It was understandable, I guess. I was lucky he was the only cop who shot, actually. I went into surgery immediately, but tried to fight and push it until I knew if they'd found Dana. A few hours later, I woke up. 2 police officers were there and informed me Dana was found, and she was alive. After 2 weeks and multiple surgeries, doctors had managed to save both of Dana's legs, ribs, and fixed the heavy internal trauma. The park was cleaned up, and a group of new staff were hired to patrol it. And as usual, there wasn't a solution for the underlying problem. It was all just swept off to another park. I went through a few months of physio for my shoulder. Dana went through a 1.5 years. But she made it, and she was jogging and rock climbing as well as before. A few weeks ago, we hiked the trail again to the lookout, and she said yes. And that concludes tonight's episode. We hope you enjoyed Wolves, and we'll see you back here next week, where we'll be following an attendant at an all-hours gas station and the strange family that drives in one night. We'll see you then.